So, and
Yeah.
then this goes straight to YouTube afterwards or something.
Yeah, this Hangout on Air is live,
Okay.
so being recorded onto YouTube. Cool.
All right.
So I think we're interested in like talking today about like how trauma and identity can be informed or sort of like transformed by desire in particular,
Hmm.
like in relation to John, your piece like is about like this like connection or this wedding or this engagement between these two soldiers, uh, sort of like these fictional characters from the Civil War, like one from the north and one from the south.
Right.
So
Right.
is
So,
the way that you
yeah. So,
You can't see me.
can you see me? All right.
Mhm.
So, let me give some context to this. I came to Florida. I'm from Detroit City, and I came, go to school. I come to Florida, take a teaching job, and I come down here in the late '90s, and I see the Confederate flag everywhere. And it was very destabilizing for me, like psychologically, on a couple different levels. One, how could this be? Two, why are the black folks tripping? Three, why am I feeling very emotional about this?
Mhm.
How can this symbol have so much um, like effect and power over me? So I was always a little upset with myself. Like, how could this have, right? And that's kind of how the supremacy works through the symbols and the material culture, that it creates this sort of emotional response that sometimes is hard for you to calibrate or control or regulate. So, because a lot of my work in the beginning dealt with math and art, I was already positioned to talk about things that are very oppositional. This idea of right brain versus left brain, analysis versus emotional intuition, different ways of knowing and experiencing reality. So, I came down here to teach visual mathematics. I was curating math art shows. So this idea, math versus art. So that kind of gave me this context to think about this war, right? This visual war, and so that led to me responding to the Confederate flag with taking something that I value, like the black, red, and green colors of the Black nationalism flag, and sort of creating this synergetic kind of mixing. And then that's when I started with the Afro Dixie, Afro Rebel flag type thing. And I showed that in Soho. That was my first piece. I think it was a real piece. But I think part of my project came out of an individual, personal, emotional engagement with this Confederate flag. It wasn't an exercise. It wasn't an abstraction. It was more like um, I felt some sense of pain or some sense of psychological uneasement about connecting to this flag and having this in my visual landscape. And so I think part of the therapeutic, because the diagnostics are clear, we already know why, in a lot of ways, like the history and the trauma, and that's there. So how do you move it to a therapeutic context to sort of grow from that experience and use creative structures to move into a space that something constructive um, can happen and engage the conversation. And also, I thought that I realized there's a cultural warfare through symbols, and I really wanted not just to speak to myself and other people like me, but I wanted to make a statement to all the pro-Confederate folks. I wanted to make a statement to them and to say, hey, um, this cannot be tolerated. We live in a country that allows people to fly these flags, but I have the right on so many levels: the art right, the creative right, the legislative constitutional right to recolor it, to burn it, to bury it. You see what I'm saying? And to let you know where the boundaries are and how I could take those symbols and renegotiate its value, coming from a place of trauma to come to a place of ritual, a place of cathartic release and ceremonial remembrance of a past history that should never be forgotten, but become a source for future inspiration and a call to duty to further the activity and program of social justice. And I think that is what motivated the core of the project into the music space with the Afro-Dixie remixes, with writing like the play, doing the film. But I think the trauma element, and I learned, in looking, I've collaborated some with Karen Finley, who's done a lot of work around trauma and art, and sort of thinking about using that as a source of energy for creative intelligence and being able to flip that in a way that can move into political spaces as well as psychological spaces. And so I think that's really the kind of core source of the work. So that's what I'm thinking.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that when I looked up your piece about the flag and stuff, one of the things that really interested me and interests me in art making is the idea that I think one of the, especially with the Confederate flag, I think it's very outstanding how white supremacy basically created this narrative around the flag and the uses of it and stuff. I mean, from the beginning as a thing of, as a thing of terror for Black people, and
right.
Even now, trying to be cited as some sort of heritage thing, but
right.
It's basically about controlling the narrative. And and I feel like as artists, one of the things we do and can do is basically add to that narrative and sometimes change the narrative.
Right.
And I think that's also what happened around the Confederate flag in these last 6-7 months or so, where the national narrative about what that flag means and stuff actually did change.
Right.
And I think and that's one of the things that appeals to me about this project is that it really is taking on this thing that had this narrative all this time and really interrogating that narrative and in fact changing the narrative, and also creating different meaning. And right. I appreciate that about that piece, and but also not disavowing the history,
right.
But using that history,
right.
because it's our history too, and that's the fact of the matter.
That's right.
I mean, I'm from Virginia.
Right. So I think you're speaking directly to how Tessa has set up the question, which is about trauma. See, the thing is, when I had the black, red, and green Confederate flag, and I showed it in Harlem, and we colored all these different flags. There was an instance, which is actually in my trailer, my movie, where this black brother was walking down the street, and he sees these flags, and he gets pissed. You see what I'm saying? He's like, I don't care about color changes. You know what I'm saying? That's still the Confederate flag. So it was the trauma was so deep, right? It was doing art wasn't enough, right? And so at that point, I realized, wait, I need to add more to this project. So I did the proper way to hang a Confederate flag by hanging it from a noose, and then took it to Gettysburg. And then the Confederates and sons and daughters of Confederates, they went crazy, want to shut the city down, drama. But I did that show in Gettysburg because I wanted, in 2004, is to create a national discussion around the Confederate flag by going to Gettysburg to do this. And guess what? That never happened. I was going to have.
like 12 years later. I mean, because,
Right. So the thing is, I'm on the phone with Miri Baraka, who was going to come down and have him do the death warrant as a poetic performance, and we were going to bury the flag and the blood. We were going to do this big thing. And then the college had an emergency board meeting. It was all this drama, and they hired all these risk management folks with
God.
And so they said, John, you can't. You only can do the gallows outdoors for the weekend. Then they said you only can have the gallows just for one day. Then they said you only can do the gallows. You got to bring it indoors. And I'm like, the gallows don't fit indoors. So I ended up doing a smaller piece and then boycotting my own show. I'm on the phone with the NAACP, one of their big executive people, and they're like, why are you causing so much problems? We got a boycott going on in South Carolina. I'm like, boycott? We need, don't you appreciate the agency of art? They were like, no, they just thought I was you're like, what the hell? So the thing is, going back to the trauma issue, which Tessa brought up earlier, is that unfortunately it took 9 people to die. It took critical loss. It took collective community trauma to engage a discussion that we should have over coffee, to be honest. And that in itself shows the kind of the limit of our contemporary humanity. You follow what I'm saying? That it takes this level of trauma to create a discussion and a movement around things 50 years from now. We'll look back and go, why were they tripping about that? You follow what I'm saying? And, and so the trauma works both ways, right? You see what I'm saying? It takes trauma for me to decide, hey, I want to do this flag project. Then it takes more trauma, people to get killed, to get the flag taken off the South Carolina dome and the property and all that, because that's what motivated me to do the project for the beginning. Being in Florida to around 2000, South Carolina, the big drama about taking it off the dome. Then they say, no, let's just take it off the dome and put it in front of the state capitol, but it's still there. You know what I mean? And it's still in all these other flags around the country. And then you have this other, element, which was because you start getting these issues to start fighting each other. It's like, forget about the flag. We need jobs. Forget about that. We got other issues in the community, right? And so my point is, if you can't fight white supremacy or supremacy in its most visible form, how can you fight it in its most invisible form? You know what I mean? Like if you can't deal with what's right in front of you, tell me how you're going to deal with all the stuff that is just way more sophisticated and insidious and whatever. At least deal with it so you can learn how to practice dealing with these kind of issues, right? I mean, it's like, so I think even the leadership has been confused about this issue in terms of, oh, this is not really that important. Let's deal with the other things that are more important. But visual landscape, symbols, and signs shape your whole existence and consciousness about how to move through this space. And very often it's the artists that are much more sensitive to that than everyone else. You follow what I'm saying? Like they're much more sensitive to those kinds of injustices first. And then it becomes commonplace down the road. And then it becomes, oh, bathrooms colored, it's white, like that's normal. So I think, I hate to say it, but unfortunately, I think the trauma becomes the fire to move people to action. It moves people, and I think in some ways that has sort of pushed Black culture in a special situation, particularly around being sensitive to social justice issues and cultural development. It's that trauma, building on that trauma. And but the question is, when that trauma becomes self-defeating, and it could become like, you know what I'm saying? It's not an outward, constructive, creative output, it can sometimes like it can work inwards, and that's the tricky space as well. You know.
So, John, why did you decide to like construct this this wedding, and like, can you talk about like particularly the role of like the attraction between these two people and how that relates to desire to trauma?
So here again, so it's about taking things that you think are oppositional, right? The flag, black, red, and green, the North, the South, the black and white. Many black folks in this country may look black to you, whatever that means to you, but we all have all kinds of blood running through our veins. You know what I'm saying? And so the fight becomes so internal and external all at the same time. So it would be a natural extension as I go from the north, north-south fight and look at these sort of averaging places where there's a sense of, hey, where do these things have shared space? So it makes sense, and then so I think being inspired by what's happening with the marriage equality movement, you know what I mean, and also paying attention to bringing the work beyond the South into other areas. Then this idea of this, Union and Confederate soldier, and then also looking at the sexual politics. I mean, 2004, the Ku Klux Klan put out a press release. John Sims, a homosexual racist artist, da 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 da, and he does hot pink lavender and glitter fur Confederate flags for the homosexuals. Like it was just like, whoa. So they were really pissed about that, right? That I redid this Confederate flag and hot pink lavender, glitter and fur, and then I also did like one in chains and leather and that whole thing. And so it was just interesting to see the kind of response. And I think that kind of response got me thinking about this notion of, hey, I can imagine in the Civil War that there must have been a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier that fell in love at some point. You know what I'm saying? And have to be conflicted, right? And and got these two worlds, just the same way as you had a black person and a white person, or a slave and a master, like all these different, sort of oppositional positions, but there's this connection that is deeper than all of that, i.e. love, i.e. desire, i.e. attraction, and so forth. So that set me up to start thinking about this idea of this unification, the wedding, the civil union, and what that means on a couple different levels, and then having that officiated by like this black context, Juneteenth, black minister, black church, right? Because on some level, black folks got their freedom as this collateral consolation prize between white folks fighting each other, and and so black folks always get to play this sort of healer, that this position that we get put in. It's sort of whether it's going with the wind or it's just like we're always okay, we got this spiritual capital, and so get back together and, become great again. Where, in fact, to be honest, I really wish the South had won, and I really wish that the black folks in the South, who had outnumbered the white folks in the South at that point, would have learned some lessons from the war, and then eventually taken up arms and delivered their own freedom. That's what I really wish would happen. You see what I'm saying? And obviously that didn't happen. But it's this idea of freedom and also the desire for freedom. The desire for having freedom and the desire, thinking mathematically here, the desire to protect one's desire. That's even now metaphysical. Like, how do you create a space that you desire? Because sometimes you can have desires that you don't desire. What about that? Like, you know what I'm saying? You have these impulses and ideas that you fight yourself about. And now it sets up a certain kind of self-trauma thing where you sort of conflicted and you may send out mixed signals. And I think America around race politics have been conflicted about dealing with white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? It's like even people who come with positions of power and who say they want to do the right thing, or they come out of the abolitionist movement, or they come out of affirmative action or whatever, it's still this kind of tension about, hey, do I really want to give up white privilege? What do I separate individual privilege from white privilege to all these other kinds of privileges? It's like, because I desire being privileged, but at the same time, it's not cool to be about white privilege. So it becomes really complicated, and the mind is complicated, I guess. So that's why there's a back and forth and approximating, converging sequence that tries to provide options. And I think, this work is just part of that. It's just sort of, but, so the way so part of this thing I'm doing in the Bay Area is this idea. I'm doing this graphic novel where you have this Confederate and Union soldier. They fall in love over fighting this war, and they're pining. They're sort of fantasizing about just running off and getting married somehow, and then they end up in this time warp, and they end up in the Bay Area. You see what I'm saying? In 2016, and in this fantasy space, they roll up Annie Sprinkle, your conference. You know what I'm saying? The engagement, and they all off in Oakland and get married in a jazz thing, and then afterwards they end up back in the Civil War. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, right.
Go back, right? And it's this moment of because imagination is a wonderful tool that allows you to escape where you are, the trauma of the moment, and move into these other spaces where your desires are untethered by society, morality, legislation, terrorism or whatever, and then you come back when you wake up and feel like, okay, how do I negotiate my space right now? How do I? So that's part of the story I'm developing with that, and I think it's an interesting way to kind of end the project, and bringing it down to people and getting people to think about love and connecting across so many different lines, and what do we do to protect sort of a righteous kind of desire? Because you can have unrighteous desire too, right? You can have desires that are motivated by evil and greed and terrible things. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure the white supremacy people have a desire to have white people in control. You know what I'm saying? And desire to have a certain kind of power and, whatever. So desire is not in itself, it's a vector. The question is, what direction is it going in? You know what I'm saying? It's where's the direction? And compulsion and addiction. Addiction is good if you're doing something that is like cool and wonderful. Like, no one's tripping about the scientist who's in the laboratory addicted to the laboratory and staying up all night trying to find a cure for cancer, right? But if that's
maybe in life, maybe the girlfriend or the boyfriend or the family is saying something about that, because that's like how it operates.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, that talk about it until it affects them personally, in some way. Yeah, I mean, so it kind of that sort of changes that equation a little bit in that
Right. No,
people
you,
idea about, I think it's more about people want. I think it's also about like coming down to people wanting to be seen as good,
right, right,
and I know that that's like a simple thing, but I think that's like to me that's a big engine of white supremacy is
right.
people wanting to be seen as good.
Right, right. No, I think you're right. I mean, in terms of the perception of being seen as good. I also no, but when I was talking about that situation, I wasn't talking about the inner dynamics of family issues around somebody who's being compulsive, addictive, and I'm talking about just the general societal view of that kind of behavior. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, that's okay, but the person who's addicted to gambling or this or that or that, that's very debilitating. Now, of course, their family is going to have problems with that too. Like any
But we
kind
get the name though. I mean, if there's a scientist like working like 80 hours a week or 90
of,
hours,
right, right,
it's called committed.
right. Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying. No, that's just right.
The
That's
word, and that's what I mean about like, meaning is like like you said with desire. Desire is a word. It's us that feels
yeah.
that word.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like the desire is the vector, but the meaning is where the position and orientation of the vector is. You know what I'm saying? And so look at it like a scientist who's doing is committed, but the artist, just as science versus artist, the artist could be equally committed, but maybe not as successful in way, right? Or maybe he's doing work. You're not making any money. You're not, famous, right? You're not Prince. You're not this, or this. You're doing work that maybe only your friends get, or maybe only you get, right? And somehow maybe your artwork has kept you from killing 12 people, right? But you don't get any medals for that, right? You're not going to get a medal for, like, hey, I start off as a crazy, maniacal, diabolical person, but I've done this work and it's kept me out of prison from killing your families. Where's my award, right? You don't get an award for that. In fact, you get like, why don't you have a regular job and a retirement fund and blah, 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you go off and become successful, right? Now, the artist, switches from being this menace to this incredible godlike thing.
Yeah.
Like, everybody loves Prince, but look, Prince was 19 and got a major deal with Warner Brothers. Who gets deals like that? Be honest. You know what I'm saying? And then 2 years later, get a major movie about his work and his music. You know what I'm saying? Come on. It's like, and then have Warner Brothers build you Paisley Park. With that kind of support, of course you better do some genius stuff. Of course you better do like 39 albums. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, so you're right. It's the issue of support and but that's why I like people like Muhammad Ali, because he was willing to stop in the middle at the pinnacle of his life and say, my moral and spiritual desires are going to trump the economic professional desires. You see what I'm saying? And it became so counterintuitive, but people knew it was the right thing to do. But you see what I'm saying? It's like, so then we have Michael Jordan over here, who is the best basketball player ever, but he just want to make money doing shoes. It doesn't care if kids are killing each other over his shoes. You see what I'm saying?
Or there's no Nike
country. Yeah, or is it not affected with young people are like 5 and 6 years old, 12 years old, or whatever, children, whatever. So I think you're right. Desire as a word, as an energy, can be used by everybody. The question is, what's the orientation? And you know, and what's that mean, you know? That's
Crystal, what I heard you saying was sort of like unpicking the sort of dichotomy between like good desire or bad desire, and also like the sort of judgments that people have over whether like an intense kind of desire leads you to like a kind of obsession, and how sometimes that's called like commitment and really commended, and sometimes it's called like some kind of like psychosis or something that's really like kind of like unhealthy or not useful, and that often has like the things that make people judge that one way or the other, often actually what that's motivated by is like you know, like keeping the social norm, like just so, you know, like whether that's like supremacy or whether it's like you know, like heteronormativity or the economic drive behind a need for like marriage or whatever, you know, it's like
I
yeah,
think it's basically picking winners and losers. Oh, wait a minute. Something's going on with my phone.
yeah, to do with winners and losers. Yeah.
yeah.
Hello?
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, I'm back now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a way of sort of trying to pick winners and losers.
Uh-huh.
Right. Or yeah.
In our society.
Hmm.
Right.
Hold on for a second. Now I can't hear. All right.
Yeah.
And Crystal, do you have more to say about, like, can you speak to like desire? You know, you and I have had a lot of like, I guess, talks about this, about desire, like in creating identity, or the role of desire in trauma, or like trauma and identity. And I just wondered if you could speak to that in your piece. Has a lot of like very like personal stories in it about like moments in your life with a lot of like energy around them that have been like quite intense, let's say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, like, you know, one of the reasons I use like the sort of image it was of like the butcher and the pig is because it's a little bit also having to do with like what John was talking about, is sort of this sort of like oppositional feeling of like for me of like sort of incorporating what's seen as the light and the dark of us, but also like, you know, of the world we move through. And I feel like a lot of like issues come up with us as individuals, but also like when I'm talking about this like connection about wanting to be seen as good, that it causes us like no end of like sort of trouble, because the fact of the matter is that none of us are good all the time, and it's hard to like sort of, you know, move through this world. And like when you talk about desires, for instance, like so many of our desires, good desires, are so narrow in this society, you know, what's good. And so basically I feel like almost all of us in some way or another fall outside of that narrow seam of what's good. And that also for me causes a lot of our neurosis.
Right.
And this sort of and as like a black person moving through the world, a lot of my piece is also about being able to find like a love and understanding for myself, and incorporating like the trauma of racism, the trauma of being seen or not seen as a good person, not because of what necessarily because of what I do or don't do, but basically because of the color of my skin.
Right.
Or the way I choose to live out my sexuality, or any of those things that somebody could pick up, and basically pretty much almost all of the things that I claim as my identity would sort of put me in a place of not being good.
Right.
And so basically there's this struggle of like being accepting of that, but also disavowing that, and being like, and saying to myself, most importantly, but that, you know, of learning to accept all of the parts of me.
That's very interesting. I think the way I'm thinking about it too is I see. I don't have a problem like trying to sort of be good, right? But I think the issue is realizing that being good is an evolutionary, expansive, living, grow. Are you there?
Hmm.
Hello?
I am.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if Crystal is there. Crystal, maybe we'll. Oh, she's there.
Am I back?
Yeah, yeah,
There you go.
yeah. So I was talking about this idea of being good, which is also connected to desire in some way. But I don't have a problem, trying to be good, but knowing that being good is a changing thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it's not like, so what I may look like now is being bad might be good later on. You see what I'm saying? And so otherwise, we don't want to run the risk of being kind of a sociopathic about it, or psychopathic about it, where people don't care about good and bad. You follow what I'm saying? And don't have those discussions, and they appeal to their most greedy, narcissistic self, right? I don't care what's good or bad. I don't care what's right or wrong. I live in the moment. I'm about the moment, and I'm not thinking about future consequences. And when you're coming from an institutional dominant position, you can do that and get away with it. If you don't, then you have to absorb that culturally, psychologically, and through your own sense of identity. You know what I'm saying? So I think as part of us as artists is to use our positions and intelligence and work to push like what can be good and move into other spaces and keep people moving forward and I think through and having a commitment to a discussion because it's part of a negotiation. We're negotiating this through some sort of social democracy. You follow what I'm saying? It's like it becomes this kind of like, because I can think what I'm doing is good and wake up 2 years from now like, God, what the fuck was I thinking? You know what I'm saying? That was a bad idea. You know what I mean? It's like, but if you're in a collective, we negotiate that collectively and work that out on a community level. But I like to believe that we all are trying to move in these spaces that I hope that that are pulling us into this like good direction. What do we mean by that? We mean that we're doing things that tend to want to elevate and nurture and respect the parts and also the whole. You know what I mean? And or you wake up and go, if everybody was like me, would the world perish? You know what I'm saying? Like there's some element of that, and or if everybody was like me, would the world stagnate? Or would it prosper? And I think that kind of thinking motivates me. Certainly, I don't want everybody like me, but certainly I hope there's parts of me that I care about other things other than me, and I am committed to the growth of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was having some trouble hearing, but I heard most of what you had to say. I had to go away for a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. No, but yeah, I think.
I just want to like some of the things that you guys are talking about is reminding me of last year I worked with this curator, Crystal Nelson, who wrote this book, Dark Desires.
Okay.
The Erotic Lives of Black Women.
Right.
I'll just read you the first little bit. The black female body is in a perpetual state of recovery from a long series of trauma that has used the anti-erotic to flatten and distort it. It issues from the tragic and short life of Saartjie Baartman, the pain of whose post-mortem mutilation and display continues to reverberate through black female sexuality to the enslavement of African women in the New World, and their subsequent transformation to chattel slave factory vis-a-vis the womb. It emanates from the use of rape as form of social regulation in the Jim Crow South to the masculinist fetishization of black women's body parts, mainly the buttocks, in popular culture. For decades, the strategy of many black scholars and artists has been to push against black sexuality, working to draw attention away from the sexualized black body as spectacle by asserting a culture of bourgeoisie respectability that denies sexual subjectivity and the erotic, especially to cis women and the female identified, but to little avail. Throughout the history of visual culture, the black body as a site of erotic subjectivity has still managed to routinely emerge in various guises, from Josephine Baker's banana dance to Serena Williams' athletic yet highly sensuous performance in body-conscious tennis uniforms, and even now further in the Beyonce video, Serena Williams. In the 90s, a noticeable shift occurred where the self-representation of black women as sexual subjects and not objects increased. Hip-hop became the primary site where black female rappers asserted their erotics by speaking explicitly about their desires and appetites, including the desire to be recognized as sexual beings. These examples do not even begin to touch upon the subcultural sites where black people explore the de-mainstream desires such as BDSM, power play, and homosexual or even pansexual encounters. A considerable archive of visual and literary material has been produced to document these underrepresented sexual subjectivities, yet despite the growing material culture surrounding black positivity, black sex positivity, and black female sexual subjectivity, it has yet to gain full traction in the fine art world. So I'm not going to read you the whole, oh no, maybe I will because we're basically there. Through a handful of artists such as Renee Cox with her licentious self-portraits, and Michelene Thomas with her ongoing studies of Bad Mama Jamas, a la Pam Grier's blaxploitation heroines and the spaces they occupy, have risen to prominence with their work. There are few other considerations of the black female erotic subject in the contemporary art world. So this exhibition, which is the book that goes with it, Dark Desires, The Erotic Lives of Black Women, seeks to help fill the void. And I think that through the privilege of getting to work with her last year, and then when I through that lens, Ham, it's also just very interesting to watch you and your piece develop this year, and sort of it's just yeah. I wondered if you could speak to, or maybe just respond to that, or or maybe
yeah. I mean, part of what my sort of feeling has been, and one of the reasons I basically use myself as a subject in my films is because, one, I feel like it's important for a body like mine to be seen in public spaces. I mean, I'm a fat black woman who identifies as a butch queer. And that's not seen very often in public spaces, and so that's also important for me. And it also is a way for me also to connect to and move through shame, and a lot of shame that I've internalized from my life, just moving through the world. And so it's also a way for me to sort of this is not a word, but I'm gonna make it up anyways. But basically, to de-shamify myself, and sort of release myself from a lot of the shame that's come with my body, and so that's one of the reasons, I said, I use myself as a subject in my films, yeah, I mean, I notice I'm really intimate also with this history of sort of fetishizing black women's body to totally desexualization of black women's bodies, and that's one of the reasons why I have sort of on the table I have the mammy sort of character head, because I feel a little bit for myself in my life that even in personal relationships, I find myself getting sort of desexualized basically in preference to having me like basically be a mammy instead of a sexual person, to basically take care and to give care and to give comfort. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, John, as far as like Black people being seen as sort of these magical, mystical, like healing people. You know what I mean? Just by virtue of being Black, pretty much, you know? So,
yeah, it's interesting. I just want to add this thing because I think there's a certain level of guilt there, which is, hey, we're not going to give you economic parity or reparations, right?
Yeah.
But we'll give you spiritual capital.
Right. Which we say we value, but we don't really, because we're not going to afford it.
So that's the consolation prize, right? It's spiritual capital to be used in our stories, like Hollywood and like books, you know, and that kind of thing. That's where you can cash in at the company store.
Right.
You know? But it doesn't help you get a house.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't get you get a house, and it also doesn't help you find sort of like love and connection and all these like human emotions that we want, because in some ways then you're like sometimes I see it like this, you know, Black men are sort of like dehumanized by being seen as hyper-violent, hypersexual, and you know, and unthinking and like, you know, action, you know, that's like sort of like how ways I feel like Black males are like dehumanized. I feel like a lot of like Black females are dehumanized by being like magical, and you know, these magical creatures, you know, with this magical power to endure and to, you know, and this like, you know, magical power to heal and to take care, but it's still like dehumanizing.
Right. Well, you know, I remember my mother. I remember having discussions, like even being young, it's like, oh, the powerful Black woman, right? It's this idea, like all Black women are powerful, which goes into what you're talking about. And then the Black women that I grew up who were like, hey, I'm not powerful right now. I'm not strong right now. You know what I'm saying? So what are you gonna do with that? What are you gonna do with that energy? Because the side of it's like, no, we want you to be strong, so we don't have to acknowledge the responsibility of taking care of each other and stepping up. So you continue to be strong because that's less work for me. You know what I'm saying? You know, that happens within the community and outside the community. You follow what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And so
it happens in personal relationships all the time. I mean, for me in any case, and I see it happening, you know, with other people, with other Black women as well. It's like even in our personal relationships, we like sometimes have this expectation to be like superhuman,
right.
which then, like I said, in fact dehumanizes us. And again, like I said, part of that and part of my piece is to sort of speak to these like pieces of ourselves. Of course, there's pieces of me that is super strong, and a lot of that is because I've had to be.
Right.
Not because of some choice I made or
so part of that might be trauma driven, right?
Exactly. It's totally trauma driven. Not totally, I mean, but yeah, there's a big part of it is trauma driven, and it's like, you know, ways you learn to cope and to react to the environment you live in. But then I think, but what I also want to put forward though is that there is a part of us that also can choose. And part of what my piece is saying, and part of what I want to say as an artist, is that we take the good and the bad. Our identity is built from what we feel inside and how people see us, how we see ourselves, is built from our histories, and not just the histories of our parents, but like, you know, the history of our parents, you know, and like, and it also is like built on trauma, it's built on joy, it's built on the ability to have joy while in trauma, you know. I mean, it's like all these big pieces, and I feel like what we're taught is to, like, again, to sort of embrace the pieces we see as good and to disavow the pieces we see as bad. But the fact of the matter is, I feel like we can't accept ourselves and be ourselves unless we can kind of accept all of that stuff. And it kind of goes again to, like, there was a discussion being had, I guess, on Facebook the other day by some friends about, like, the trouble with the word victim.
Right.
And, like, and one of my responses was is that I feel like sometimes in this world that it's worse to be a victim than to be a victimizer. And that's a problem. And I think part of that problem goes back again to, like I said, being basically like the shame that's, like, sort of attached to being a victim, which basically, you know, helps victimizers keep their secrets in the end. And I think a lot of, like, that has to do, like, also kind of like with this game that's played around white supremacy, and, like, the way white supremacy moves in the world is to basically to keep itself undercover and a secret, and to keep people from talking about it. And this whole thing of who's good and who's bad and who's the victim and who's the victimizer is part and parcel of that.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, and so I guess also it goes back to, also for me, it has to do with, like, good desires and bad desires and who names those things and who gets to say, basically, right. You know, and so part of my reason and my want also is to kind of go back what you're talking about, John, about, like, the artist's job, about, like,
right.
Expanding on good and bad. I think our job is also just to expand on what's possible.
Right, right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
What's
yeah.
possible in humanness and human relationship, and because obviously what's good for me may not be good for the person down the street, you know? I mean, so it's basically about, like, giving space and giving, like,
inspired
voice.
to have those discussions and stay in discussion about what could be good in the moment and not in the next moment because of the political context or whatever. Right. And like with my work, I think part of it is I think who decides what's good and bad and this and that, we all are stakeholders in that discussion. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And that's when you realize the real power is that you have a right to be in that discussion. Right. And your voice matters, and it can inspire and create flames that push forward energy that can change the cultural discourse and the cultural thinking about something. And I think so if that means we take the flag and reappropriate it and now it's going to have a different meaning. Now it means something that, you know, whatever, right? But you never had that power. You know what I'm saying? Also, you know what I mean? Like the way the N word has been, like, flipped and whatever. You know, it's like, so it's just like that happens all throughout history, being able to flip stuff. And I think that's part of the cultural warfare, and that's part of the back and forth. But we have a place at that table, and I think it's important to activate that. And I think that's part of it, and have the desire to activate that. You see what I'm saying? I think part of it's my work as an activist. Like, you know, I'm working on zero budget here. You see what I'm saying? And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of artists and activists and whatever. I can't pay people, but it's inspired desire. You follow what I'm saying? To be a part of something that can make a difference. And I think that's the desire that I speak to, that I try to serve. And then help try to figure out how to make that sustainable. Because if activism is not sustainable, then you get what happened in the 60s and 70s with the various movements. They dissipate. Disco comes along. Now, you know what I'm saying? Now everybody's chasing the disco ball. You know, like, geez, how did that happen? You know? And so how do you create sustainable desire, particularly in the political art context or activist context? You know, it's like, you know, Black Lives Matter, okay, right now, where's that going to be in 5 years from now? Where's that going to be in 10 years? How does that, like, how does that move and transform the spaces where that energy is sustained? Because race, this is the whole point about how I come to this project now, what I realized. Guess what? White supremacy in America built on slavery is a permanent part of the culture.
Exactly.
It's like being born with MS or being born with a systemic nervous system problem. You follow what I'm saying? And so you may walk around and feel like everything is fine, and then under external stress, you can't walk anymore. And then 10 minutes later, you walking again. And you might forget. You know what I'm saying? And then you add a little ADD on top of that, you don't forget, am I sick? No, I'm not sick, but you really are. So I think part of it is having built into the culture, it's like, hey, the kind of prophylactic kind of therapies and to get you, hey, wait a minute, you have to pay attention and have rituals, and whether it's yoga or burning a Confederate flag, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know what I'm saying? You got to have these rituals set up to acknowledge the illness and the sort of fidelity to paying attention and moving forward and self-care. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Just forgetting. And I think that's part of the other psychological illness. It's like, let's forget this, let's move on. And you're like, no,
Right.
permanent. We can't move on. It's a permanent part of the situation. You see what I'm saying? And so we have to recognize that and then create cross-cultural rituals that draw inspiration from that. That's kind of my thing, you know. And I think maybe, you know, in terms of this, you know, right or wrong, but you know, it's not so binary, right? I mean, there's a gray area, and there's a point where people are switching back and forth, or, you know, of course, that's part of the humanity, you know, of being, you know, trapped in this space that is analog, but we have this mental space that is so digital. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, like the mathematics versus the art. You know, you want to mathematize this stuff, right? And create these axioms about things, but we really live in this physical analog space where there is no ones and zeros. You know what I'm saying? There's like almost one. You know? It's almost zero. You know, and
it's like you both talking of these ways of like bringing like energies that seem like maybe oppositional or that don't normally go together, like how am I really heard you say, like that phrase you said, the ability to have joy while in trauma, like really that's a very interesting somatic dichotomy to like embody in terms of like this whole causation. And you know, maybe it's a situation that occurs more frequently than we actually realize, you know, and maybe your piece is sort of pointing us towards recognizing these somatic dichotomies that exist, you know, just like day to day, like especially in like identities that are sort of like you know, like less mainstream, because of course you then like, you know, you sort of like kind of like switch hats depending on what situation you're in. So you're sort of like kind of like managing yourself like, okay, well right now I'm going to be like a queer person, a straight person like environment, or right now I'm going to be like someone who like passes in this kind of environment or whatever. So there's, you know, there's this constant sort of like negotiation between identities. So it may be that in fact those sorts of things like joy while in trauma, like they actually may be more common than, well, we just sort of like hide them, you know, we bury them because they're sort of hard, or they don't serve us in what we're trying to do in the moment, whether it's to pass or whether it's to like be recognized or whatever it is. So anyway, there's that sort of like dichotomy that I hear you speaking to there, and the power of that. And then John, like you're like, obviously this sort of like, it's just so, you know, it's so like the symbols are so strong in your work, like, you know, these two characters, and they're going to like, you know, they're gonna get married, they're gonna like combine together, you know. So, and there's these two different ways that I see you guys approaching it. Like John, you're talking a lot about like sort of like finding your, like taking up, you know, like embodying your voice at the table about making the judgment about what's a good desire and what's a bad desire. And Ham, I'm not sure if I'm totally right about this, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing, I think, with you is that it's like, rather than like being like too concerned with the right or the wrong, it's more like just looking at the presence of desire. So it's all like stepping back, like even before that conversation starts, and sort of like experiencing desire, like just sort of like, if we start from the premise that like everybody's desires are right and wrong, and they sort of like constellate into a personhood that is both right and wrong all the time, it almost makes right and wrong sort of like irrelevant at a certain point. So you just are a being with desires, and those desires like create an entity which is formed in the world, but it's not really something you're trying to do. It just sort of like is or something. So there's these two different ways that you guys are approaching right and wrong as a dichotomy. Does that sound right?
I would say though, for me, I'm not saying that like I don't want to say that like sort of right and wrong is irrelevant. I would just say as an action, put it that way. I would say that right and wrong is not irrelevant as an action.
Okay.
But that like, I feel like there should be this base where we can look at our desires, our feelings, our emotions, all of those things, without like trying to divide it into right and wrong or good and bad, and that's a starting point. It's not an end point.
Right. No, I mean, that's right. And also, you made this very interesting point about this idea of joy in the trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the Afro-Dixie remixes that, you know, and I've been doing these listening parties all over the country, is when you hear a gospel version of Dixie, and I watch a 75-year-old black woman from Alabama listen to that, right? And she has this subversive joy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's a subversive. It's not a regular kind of Christmas joy, right? It's a subversive joy of deliverance on some level, right? Because she knows that gospel music. She knows those cadences. She knows those chord changes. She knows what that means, right? And she knows that that's beating back the fear and trauma of this song. You follow what I'm saying? And it's winning. You follow what I mean? And there's a joy in that. It's sort of
Can
like.
I tell you the story about music from itself? You know that song? There's that I guess it's I forget what band it is, but there's that song "Sweet Home Alabama," right? And it's basically, and every once in a while I hear it on the radio. But because I'm like the type of person that I am, it has a good melody, and I can't help singing along. And then there always comes a point where I'm just like, I'm singing this song again, and then I have to like be quiet, because. But it's kind of like that, there's something about the song and the music that touches me, because music touches me. But then I like listen to the lyrics, and then the lyrics again,
Right. So I think with the music thing, it becomes this like some palatable and obvious how desire and the content, right? The desire and this idea of what's right and wrong. You follow what I'm saying? Provides. You see what I'm saying? They can be colliding. So I can have some racist person humming along to this bossa nova version of Dixie. You know what I mean? And you're like, what am I doing? I hate, or samba version or whatever, or reggae versus like, I hate those people. I hate that music. You know what I mean? And, or vice versa. Some person is like, why am I grinding and want to do the twerk to this like R&B version to Dixie? This is not. You know what I'm saying? So there's this like desire element that's moving you in one way, and then there's this right and wrong thing that's moving in this other way. And if you don't sit down and have a conference, you're going to look very mentally disturbed to the outside world. You know what I'm saying? So, and then it gets framed as an art experience and everything goes, right? But
yeah.
But I think having
because I've been listening to that CD in the car this week, so it's like whenever I've been transitioning from like place A to place B, so it means that like I show up to place B and I get out of the car and I'm all, wish I was in D, like, and I'm like looking on the floor like hooray, hooray, and I'm like like I'm at a base right now where I just it's like a little intense, and as I'm feeling that like that intensity of like knocking on someone's door singing Dixie song, like,
but you
sort of like locking that song back down inside me, like I'm not gonna like answer and be like, oh, like whistling or something.
but
That process, like locking that down again, I feel like, wow, that's art working on me, like on my nervous system, in my body, like that process of like self-reflection of like, ooh, maybe you don't want to be singing, like, and plus the sort of like love of the song or whatever, it's like actually occur. It's like a very effective way of like getting the that
it becomes
into my live body. It's kind of this incredible experience. I'm like, woo, yeah. Like,
so I'm thinking that if I could like synthesize this or contract this to one sentence, it would be like the instrument of desire and aesthetic can make something wrong right. You see what I'm saying? The instrument of aesthetics, you know what I'm saying, and desire as an instrument, as a cultural device, as a culture, like it can make something wrong right. You follow what I'm saying? And that becomes part of the survival, onto the survival and battle over trauma. You follow what I'm saying? And it's like that's because the right and wrong is always in constant fighting. You know what I'm saying? We all have our own rights and wrongs. Nobody's trying to get rid of that, but it's always in battle. But the question is, your desire is also part of that battle, and you know what I'm saying? And it's like sometimes you're like, yo, that's a little glitter and shiny. Maybe I need to back off of that. You know what I'm saying? Because it's pulling you in a way like, oh, I learned my lesson. You know what I'm saying? And so. But sometimes the shining, the glitter, and the da-da-da is a way to seduce you into a deeper discussion where you can be changed in a kind of way. You know what I mean? And so that's seduction. Sexiness. Like all of that is part of the seduction element to get people to sort of, they move through various states, mental states, emotional states, physical states. You follow what I'm saying? And so I think that is part of the dynamic here, because I think desire can be great, but it could also be that serpent too. You see what I'm saying? And it could be that angel, that it could be that like thing, like, oh my God, how did I end up in hell? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Well, you've been following the goal, buddy. You know what I'm saying? You've been following the gold glitter. You know what I'm saying? And so. But yeah, I think that's the key. It's like, and as part of my work, is how do I subvert people? You know what I'm saying? Like when I do these things, you cannot look at the Confederate flag hanging from a noose and not have a response. You know what I'm saying? It comes from the gut. Either you're going to be laughing or you want to kill me. You know what I'm saying? It goes, or you might go, wow, like, why do I like this song? I hate this artist. Shit. Like, I'm in your head, buddy. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's the desire stuff that works like emotional, psychological judo. So the more hate they come with, you follow what I'm saying? Because the hate is a certain kind of negative vectorizing desire. You follow what I'm saying? And then you flip it around, and now they're humming your tune. Granddaddy, why you singing that Dixie that way?
Hey guys, unfortunately, because I'm enjoying this conversation immensely, but I have to get going pretty soon.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed you. I'm enjoyed meeting with you guys.
Yeah, man. It's awesome. I captured some of the things that we said, and I'll send you the document about it, and you can make any edits that you want. But yeah, and I'll send you the link to this video chat also. Yeah, it's been such a, it's so great to have you guys as part of, This Is What I Want Festival this year. It's like, it's a real honor. And it's also good to, like, the work is so strong and powerful, and there's so much to be said and talked and engaged about it, like through the body, like through the mind. Like, it's good to, I just appreciate having this space that both of you were able to chat today. And I'm looking forward to the shows. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
All right.
you. And good talking with you, John. Good meeting you. And
I want to talk also about like what I'm doing with this wedding and stuff. I wanted to reach out to you and see what
yeah,
kind of people we can get. You know, there's going to be a poetic response element, so I'm looking for people who want to be a part of the wedding somehow.
okay.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Please do.
Okay.
All right, you guys have a good day. I'm gonna sign off now.
All
All
right.
right. Cheers, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.